Welcome to the Unity Guides Expert Interview Series. My name is Clayton Stenson. I'll be your host today. This series is brought to you by Unity Guides Incorporated, where we help develop Unity within companies running on the entrepreneurial operating system. We do this through fractional integrator services and relationship coaching for the visionary and integrator. And the reason I started this interview series is that I've had some awesome conversations with some amazing people in recent years. And the conversations have been so good that I felt like I needed to share them with other people to add value to them as well. And today's guest is Steve Caton. Steve is the owner of Alteza Solutions, a fractional sales company that places experienced fractional salespeople in companies looking to grow revenue. So welcome, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Clayton. It's great to be here.
Excited to have you today. So today's topic is, how do you know when you're ready for a sales professional? So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, kind of set us up for the conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's a really relevant conversation, especially for businesses that are scaling, and especially where businesses where you have the visionary leader kind of in the sales process. They're doing it themselves, and that means they're out there being a rainmaker for their business and also closing the opportunities that get kind of created by that activity. And a lot of times, and I can speak from my own personal experience, having built Alteza this way, you get to a point where you're like, man, if I didn't have to manage all of these sales opportunities all the way to the close, I could use that time to do more valuable activities. But at the same time, you wrestle with, well, what's more valuable than closing business, right? So it's a tension, but a lot of business owners that are growing get to that place where they're like, I think I'm ready to bring in somebody to represent my brand and my company and close business for us, and so that we can A, grow sales, and B, free me up, to be the visionary leader that I'm called to be.
Yeah.
And so it's a very common question in the minds of a lot of business owners. The problem is, Clayton, and the reason this conversation is so important is that many times we make the mistake of thinking that sales success is just about a human. It's just about finding the right human being who's got the right personality and the sales experience, and we just kind of turn them loose and they go make it happen. They wave the magic wand and the money comes in. Well, it doesn't quite work that way. It'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't quite work that way. So sales success actually happens when good, effective, talented salespeople are working in combination with a series of systems and processes. And so that's the thing I want to talk about today is, okay, what are the foundational kind of things, that ingredients, if you will, that need to be there that are going to help this salesperson be successful, and not just leave them out there kind of
Yeah.
twisting in the wind and largely being
Yeah.
largely struggling. Yeah.
And I would imagine that a lot of times that's kind of what happens is visionary thinks they can just hire somebody and they're going to run with it. And then it doesn't work out. And then you become
Right.
shy, like, I don't want to do that again. Right. So,
Yeah,
uh,
exactly. Or they'll think, oh, I just made the wrong hire. It was the wrong person. So let me
right.
go do it again with a different person, and then the same thing happens
Right.
again. Yeah.
It's easy to just point the finger and say, yeah, that person wasn't the right one.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
not look in the mirror right,
Yeah.
for what we did.
Exactly.
So what are some of these key things? And I'm gonna get my notepad out and take some notes too while we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, in order to kind of simplify all the pieces and parts, I kind of like to break it down into three high level categories, right? So the first one is organizational elements. The second one is engagement and lead generation components. And then the third one is sales strategy and process. So those are the three buckets that we'll kind of dive into. And each one of them obviously has a number of things we can unpack
Mhm.
within it. And so, but we'll start with the organizational elements. So this is the first bucket. And really, this is where you get down to the kind of things that really should be clarifying our why as an organization. So this is our mission statement, our purpose, our vision, right? This is kind of who we are and why we exist as a company. And that seems like a real no-brainer. I think a lot of people hear that and go, well, duh. I mean, yeah, I've got that. Why does that matter? Well, I think the reason it matters is because everybody has to know what your why is. And most of all, the people who are thinking about doing business with you, they want to know what your why is and how it helps them. And so salespeople need to understand that. And when there's a lack of clarity there, it just creates confusion. And so what we see more, I mean, more often than I care to admit, when we talk to companies before we place a sales pro, is that the visionary leader might have a really good sense of what that mission statement is, but after them, it's
Mhm.
really squishy. You know, it really
Yeah.
leaks once it gets past that visionary leader.
Mhm.
So that's one, that has to be really clear to everybody. And then I'll rattle off a few, and then a few more, and then we'll talk. I'm sure you'll have questions about it. So
Yeah.
the next one is cultural values. These are cultural or core values, and again, this is kind of the 3 to 7 characteristics that really embody our organizational character, our DNA. And again, that really matters because, again, the people that represent us in the marketplace, they need to see that we actually have core values and that we live those out. So, again, if there's inconsistency between things they see on the wall and the way that we behave, that's a problem for
Mhm.
salespeople who have integrity, right?
Yeah.
So, salespeople who believe that selling is serving, they need to see that those core values are legitimate. And so that would be the second one. And then the next thing is brand identity. And this is really more about it's kind of the why you do what you do and why you exist, but also how do you want to be perceived in the marketplace? How do
Mhm.
you want to show up in the marketplace? So are you a very kind of button down professional organization like you might expect to see in a financial services context? Or are you a little bit more organic and fun
Mhm.
and approachable like you might see with some marketing organizations, right? So how does that kind of core identity inform how we show up in the marketplace and what kind of language and messaging that we use, and how we want our salespeople to behave, right? Because the
Yeah.
salespeople need to behave consistently with that. And then the next one would be value proposition. So that's exactly what that sounds like, right? It's our unique value proposition. And gosh, Clayton, you've probably seen this many times. Again, sometimes that's super clear for the visionary leader and then less clear for everybody else on the team. And so that can be a problem. And so all of these things that I just went through, so mission, cultural values, brand identity, unique value proposition, all of this rolls up to something that we call internal clarity. And so that company must have internal clarity before they can expect anybody to represent clarity externally, right? If you can't go into the market and be clear unless these things are clear internally. And many times we see a lack of clarity internally with these elements, which means it's going to be very difficult to
Mhm.
translate
Mhm.
that brand out into the marketplace. So that's why all these things are so critical.
Mm. It's really good. Like this, listening to you talk, it sounds like the EOS, VTO, like the why, the core values,
Yeah,
a lot of those elements.
exactly.
The other thing that kind of came to mind is, you know, when I like for my current fractional client, when I went on their website and all this stuff was like super clear, and I was like, yes, I can get behind this,
Yeah,
right? Like that's this internal clarity you talk about. Right?
yeah,
I have no problem selling. I'm not the salesperson, I'm the fractional integrator, but I have no problem. And I've already, made some connections and created, some interest in the company because it's also clear. It makes it so easy.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. It's you're familiar with Donald Miller with
Yeah.
Story Brand, right?
Yeah.
Business Made Simple. So he has a phrase he uses all the time that I love, and that is, if you confuse, you lose,
Yeah.
right? And it's absolutely true. And the lack of internal clarity will lead to confusion externally, and people will move on and find something, even if they don't do it, it might even be sort of subconscious, but
Yeah.
that
You may
people are
not
drawn
realize
to
it.
clarity. We're drawn to clarity, so we have to have it. And
Yeah.
salespeople cannot be expected to represent your brand effectively in the market without this. It's just not. It's just they're only going to be so effective.
Yeah. No, that's good. That's good. And I would say even from an HR, from a engagement perspective internally as well, this stuff is extremely crucial for the rest of your team to buy into what you're doing, not
Yeah.
just salespeople.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, to that point, Clayton, I mean, when you think about sales, one other thing that, I talk about a lot is how sales is a team sport. And sales is not just about our sales team. Sales happens when the whole team is effective together, right? So when you have people, anybody that's customer facing has to have this same clarity,
Hmm.
whether it doesn't matter whether they're in sales or not. They might be customer support or something like that, but it's still that clarity still needs to be there because they're all working with customers, and we're all part of the sales conversation, whether we know
Yeah.
it or not.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. So what's the second category?
Yeah, second category is the engagement and lead generation piece. And so this is really interesting because a lot of times this is where the word marketing will get thrown in. And I would say when I think about marketing, there's a couple of different components to it. One is really about the brand identity, right? So it's visually how does the brand show up in the marketplace in terms of colors and logos and all that stuff, right? That's not what I'm talking about here. Lead generation
Mm,
is how do we actually go find people who are interested in what we do?
right.
And that's a part of marketing as well, but it often gets kind of lumped in with all that other stuff. And I
Yeah.
think it's two very different activities. So what we're going to
Yeah.
talk about here in the second bucket is lead generation. And lead generation really begins with an understanding of who your ideal client is, and what's the profile of the ideal client.
Mhm.
And it's very, very common, Clayton, for people to have a lot of confusion around who their ideal client is. And
Yeah.
they'll articulate it as, well, we'll work with anybody that fill in the blank, has a pulse and can write a check. No, that's not it's not an ideal client. So anyway, it's really about being very specific about who your ideal client is, and then who are the target personas that we need to interact with in the ideal client, that we have to have conversations with. So you've got to have clarity on both of those.
Mm,
So for some businesses, like Alteza, for instance, when we're talking to our ideal client, we're typically talking to the visionary leader of that business. So they are the target persona. And they typically are the ones making the decisions about whether they do business with us or not.
mm.
Sometimes, if there is somebody like you in there as an integrator, we would also be interfacing with them too, and so they're kind of a secondary persona. But the
Yeah.
point is, we have to know who those personas are so that we can articulate value proposition to them through the unique kind of needs and lenses that they look through. And
Hmm.
so this is something that gets missed oftentimes too, is, hey, I know who my ideal client is, but we don't necessarily know all the different people inside the client that we have to interact
Yeah.
with and how they think differently.
Yeah. And that's what was just coming to my mind. The visionary selling to a visionary versus selling to an integrator is totally different,
Yeah.
right? The visionary just, is about emotions and results and, big picture and, how is it going to help me? The integrator wants the details, right? Like,
Yes.
what are the deliverables? Like it's a totally different perspective. So how do you manage that when you have two people like that are so different?
Yeah. So then that's a great, perfect segue to the second item in
Okay,
the list,
perfect.
which is the buyer journey. So
Yeah.
once we understand who the ideal client profile is and then who the personas are in that, then what we need to do is actually create a journey for that ideal client that addresses those personas. So we need to understand here are the ways that this kind of a client makes decisions. And then if we're talking to the visionary and the integrator, we need to map out what are the things that the visionary is going to care about, what are the things that the integrator is going to care about, and how do all those things tie together. And we need to make sure that our sales process and the buyer journey we create is taking all those things into consideration. Otherwise, you're going to end up like this happens all the time. Salespeople or business owners will be really good at talking to one of the personas, but then they're sort of either ignoring the second one or they just don't
Mhm.
have a real strong script in place for them. And then that individual will end up kind of torpedoing the deal. And it usually happens at the very last, like you're right at the finish line. You think you're going to sign it, you're counting the money, and then it goes
Yeah.
away. You're like, what the
Yeah.
heck happened? You
Yeah.
know? So yeah, we don't want that to happen. So designing a buyer journey to specifically address those target personas is really
Uh,
important.
Reminds me of back in the day I used to sell Cutco cutlery. I don't know if you're
Yeah, yeah,
and they always used to coach us. You better have the husband and the wife in the room, right? Because you could have a great call, great presentation, and then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, well, I need to talk to my wife or I need
yeah,
to talk to my husband, and then you're done, right?
yeah, and
Or you got to do
that's
it
it.
all over again,
That's right.
right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and here's something that some just a fun little sidebar fact about that kind of a thing. And this is really probably more relevant when you're dealing with larger companies that you're speaking to or larger organizations.
Yeah.
But if you have someone that you're talking to who is constantly telling you that they're the decision maker,
They're not.
they're probably not the decision maker. And when you're talking to somebody who's constantly telling you that they've got to talk to somebody else, or they use the pronoun we or they're the decision maker
That's a smoke
most of the
screen.
time. Yeah.
Either way, that's funny.
Yeah. But the point is we have to know those things and know how to, flesh that out and make sure we're talking to all the right people.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
that's good.
Yeah, so then the third thing here, still in the same category of engagement and lead generation, is now an understanding of what a sales funnel really is, and the difference between a marketing qualified lead and a sales qualified lead. So when we think of sales funnel, typically what people think about it when in a sales funnel is once somebody is actually engaged in a sales conversation with us, and then all the steps from the discovery call to the close, and that is a sales funnel. But there's above that sits this whole universe of potential prospects, right? These people that they're not sales opportunities yet, but they could be.
Hmm.
And many times we ignore that piece, and we are like, well, we get referrals, or we got word of mouth and stuff. So we have to think about a strategy that goes out there into the ether and engages with those suspects, those marketing qualified leads. They're really just suspects, right? And we want to engage them and get them to have some awareness of our brand. And content marketing is something that is used a lot to do this, especially in a business to business context. But then once somebody engages with our content, let's say they come to a webinar or they download an ebook or they listen to this, interview that you're doing, that is a marketing qualified lead. Okay, so they're interested, but they're not necessarily qualified to have a sales conversation. And so we need to recognize that we have suspects that we create marketing qualified leads with, and then when we have a marketing qualified lead, that is when we need to start warming them up with more content and more conversations, and that some of those conversations can be from salespeople. But those salespeople need to understand, hey, this person may or may not be ready to have a sales conversation yet, right?
Right.
They
You
may
got to
just
know
be
which they are.
curious. Yeah. And
Yep.
then once somebody says, hey, I'm interested in what you do, and I've got, you guys solve the problem that I have a desire to fix the problem, I've got a budget to fix the problem, and now we're going to move them into a qualified sales conversation. Now that's a sales qualified lead, right?
Hmm.
So what too many business owners do is just kind of lump all that together, and then it's just really it's not very easy to do forecasting and really understand what's real and what's not real. And so when we talk about sales funnel, we talk about being able to kind of differentiate between those different kind of realities with prospects. Does
That's
that
interesting.
make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because most of the companies that I've worked at, there hasn't been, a really strongly developed sales component, right? It's
Yeah,
mostly been the visionary driving it. And
yeah,
I've been the person who's kind of closing, you know,
yeah,
more in a construction situation where it's, he's brought them in and they need a quote or whatever.
yeah.
Um, but once you start marketing and trying to go into the ether, as you put it, and bring leads in, it's different. It's totally
Yeah.
different situation.
It is, and here's the common outcome of not having clarity around this is that a visionary leader or a sales leader will give a salesperson a list of names or say, hey, we've got this list of names in our CRM, and all these names came to us from a conference we attended, or we have this list, or what have you. And so we've got people for you to call. And then the salesperson starts doing outreach into that list and making calls and getting almost nowhere with it. And then the visionary leader is frustrated and they're going, well, this salesperson's no good. They can't close anything. I gave them, 200 leads to follow up on. But again, because we lumped them all together, what they may be following up with is just a bunch of suspects, not really
Mm-hmm.
prospects.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So their hit rate's going to be really low. That's the
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You need to have reasonable expectations based on what you're giving them to work with.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So, and then the last thing in this bucket would be sales enablement. And what that is, very simply, Clayton, is content that helps to support the salesperson. So, if I have a conversation with somebody that's interested in what I have to offer, and then I learn some things in that conversation about kind of what their situation is, their problem they're trying to solve, and I have a piece of content that I can then send them as a follow up, it helps them further be educated about what I do, but it also helps them realize, oh, Steve was listening to me. Like he
Yeah.
heard me say, fill in the blank, and he sent me this article that speaks to that problem. So it's building trust and credibility, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also, again, educating. And a lot of times we give salespeople nothing at all to work with in terms of resources that they can put in the hands of prospects to help them make their decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the third or the fourth piece of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And then
Yeah.
the third category was strategy
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
science.
The third
I did
category, sales strategy and process. Yeah.
great process.
And that one, we can go through that a little bit more quickly. Sales strategy is really just that's our go to market, right? That's how we're going to market. So it basically taking all the ingredients that we just talked about, unique value proposition, brand identity, ideal client profile, target personas. Where are we going to go deploy that? Where do we find those people hanging
Right.
out, and how are we going to engage with them? So, are we going to do trade shows? Are we going to do content strategy? Are we going to go? Are we going to create some kind of online course? I mean, there's all kinds of different things. Maybe it's all of the above, but the strategy is really about where are we going to go find the ideal clients that we're looking for, and how are we going to engage with them? What is our approach to engage in conversations with them?
Mm-hmm.
That would be the sales strategy. And then the sales process is really about the deal stages. Like once somebody is a qualified sales opportunity, what are the different stages of the sales process that we move them through from let's get to know each other to let's do business,
Yeah.
and making sure that the steps in the process actually have meaningful metrics that you're trying to hit before you move it from one stage to the next. Because the big mistake that gets made there is you have a conversation with somebody. This is super common. You have your very first sales conversation. Someone says, "This sounds great. How much does it cost?" And you go, well, you know what? Let me just send you a proposal because it has all of our pricing in it. And then we can schedule a follow up, right? And then the proposal gets sent just for the sake of sharing pricing. And then the salesperson takes the sales opportunity and moves it from discovery all the way to proposal. So now you see this deal sitting in the proposal stage in your CRM and you're going, oh man, that's great. We got an 80% chance of closing that. And you're forecasting potential revenue off of that. And it was nowhere near being ready for a proposal. It was just they just wanted
Mm-hmm.
pricing.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't manage that process correctly. So we need to make sure every deal, every stage in the deal in the sales process has very specific criteria that have to be met before we can move it from one stage to the next. That's getting a little bit nerdy, but you get it.
I'm an integrator. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
So that was a lot. And I just want to come back to the question, how do you know when you're ready for a sales professional?
yeah.
Right?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, this is the essence of it. So, the answer to the question is basically what parts of these things we've just talked about
Yeah.
are required before you hire, as opposed to nice to haves that can evolve over time. And I
Yeah.
would say For sure, everything in the first bucket is
Yeah.
required. Okay, all the organizational elements, that internal clarity. If
Yeah.
you if you don't have that, it's too soon. Like you
Yeah.
got to get that figured out, right? And
Yeah.
then in the second bucket, it would be the ideal client definition. So understanding who your ideal client is and who the target personas are,
Yeah.
and what's the journey we want to take them on. And if you know those things, if you've got all that, you got good clarity around that, you're ready. You can hire a salesperson because the funnel, the enablement, the strategy, the process, all of those things can evolve. You can kind of build those as you're flying the plane.
Hmm.
But those first things, if you don't have clarity about your ideal client profile and
Yeah.
who we need to talk to, you know your salesperson could they could get lucky and close a few deals, but it's not going to be consistent. It's going to be really inconsistent. And if you don't have internal clarity, it's going to be very inconsistent. So I always say, hey, if you're good, if you're locked down in those areas, then it's okay. It's time to bring in someone who can help you with sales. But if you're still figuring that stuff out, do the work you need to do there first. Otherwise, you're probably going to be paying a lot of money to that salesperson for a while before they start closing business.
Hmm. Yeah. And then it's, you got to have the right person. The less of this you have, you need a better quality person, more experienced, I would say, to help you build this.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
You know,
right.
like I remember when I first met you, I thought you were a sales acceleration type person, like a VP of sales, right? Which is one model, right?
Hmm.
Which would come in and essentially like build a lot of this stuff
That's
for you,
right. Yep.
right?
Yep.
Um, but that's not what you are. Alteza's a little different. So maybe I won't just would love to hear your kind of perspective for anybody that's listening, kind of what you do, because it's a little different than that.
Yeah, well, you just touched on probably the biggest distinction, right? Which is Alteza isn't about building all of that infrastructure. It's not about building all that internal clarity, and it's not about necessarily identifying ideal client profile and target personas and all that, right?
Yeah.
What we are about is plugging in a sales professional who is then going to run with all of that information and start closing business for you.
Yeah.
So if those things are missing, then someone like a sales acceleration consultant is going to be probably a better place to start to build all of those pieces, and then we can plug a salesperson into that.
Mhm.
If there are, and that doesn't mean we can't work in a situation where there's still refinement happening. Like there might
Mhm.
still be some improvement that can happen. No
Yeah.
problem. Like we can work with that because there's nothing like frontline feedback from salespeople to help you refine those things, right? But
Hmm.
if they're missing altogether, or there's just if you talk to five people on the team and they give you five different answers to what your unique value proposition is, then, you probably need to do some work there before you bring in a salesperson.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
then when you're ready to bring in a salesperson, what Alteza does is brings in the right fit from a personality and culture standpoint to go execute and close business for you.
Hmm. Awesome. Well, this is good. If I like what you said at the very beginning, right? The visionary probably has some of this stuff clear in their head, but it doesn't have a lot of value if you're looking to scale. If
That's
it's
right.
if it's just in here, right? So I think it's if you're watching this and you're like, geez, I need to do this work. Um, like, yeah, you can't grow a sales department without this stuff, without a
Yeah.
doubt. You
Yeah.
can't grow a healthy team without this stuff either.
That's
In my
right.
in my opinion, this is foundational building block type stuff. That's why EOS implementers have the vision building days right at the start of the process. You got to build this foundation.
Yeah. Well, and that's why when we look at the clients that we've had the most success with, it is if they've done the EOS work, if they've done work with an implementer and an integrator, we feel really good about the chances of success
Hmm.
with them because they've done all this work, and now we're just plugging a person in who's going to go execute, and we're going to get to results much faster every
Yeah, and
single
you
time.
can just refine and tweak and and adjust what's already in existence,
That's
uh,
right.
and make it even better.
Yeah.
Uh, That's great. So, awesome. Any other thoughts that you can add before we wrap up? I know we're getting close to the end of our time.
Yeah, I would say the last thing that kind of fits into this whole category, you brought it up. You said the word personality. And so a lot of times when we hire salespeople, we go first on personality, like, don't we? Right? You think about it.
Hmm.
Salespeople they're usually pretty, they're pretty engaging people, and they're people, so they're very likable. And a lot of times we'll hire because of the personality. That is actually the last thing that we should be looking at, and we should look at personality in the context of all the other things we talked about. So that personality needs to align with all the other things, as opposed to starting with personality and then
Hmm.
trying to backfill all the stuff that we've talked about.
Hmm. Yeah. And I'm just curious, how, because in my experience with sales, the ability to follow a system, right? And, you know, implement a sales process or strategy, or, to do that is equally as important, probably
Hmm.
more important than personality. So how do you gauge that when you're hiring?
The sales process piece.
Their ability to follow a system,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
what we do at Alteza is we actually use the predictive index model, if you're familiar with that.
I am, yeah.
And we use PI to help us understand the strengths of that sales professional. But then as we're doing our matching process, we also have the client go through it as well so that we
Hmm.
can make sure we match them up.
Hmm.
That's just how we do it. But the point is, be sure you have some kind of a tool that you're using to assess the
Hmm.
gifts and strengths and personality of
Yeah,
that salesperson, and how they mesh with whoever's going to be leading them,
yeah,
right? Because it's really about how they mesh with
yeah, yeah,
whether it's the visionary leader or the integrator or what have you. You got to
yeah,
have a good fit there.
yeah. I just came to mind something kind of funny, right? The danger of hiring salespeople is that they're salespeople and they can tell you what you
That's
want to hear, right? They interview well, perhaps.
I mean, yeah. If they don't, I don't know how in the heck they're doing sales.
So it's
So
good to have some sort of assessment, I think, outside of
yeah,
just how they interview, right? Because
yeah, no question. Yeah, no question. And then,
awesome.
from staying on the topic of assessment, we actually have a very simple assessment called the Sales Pulse
Okay.
that you can get to on our website. That basically, it's designed to do is give you a sense of how you're doing, especially in that first bucket,
Oh,
that
good.
organizational elements and that internal clarity we talked about. So it's designed to be done by the visionary and their team. And what it'll do is, as you share it with the team, it'll show you the areas where you're in alignment and where you're not.
That's good. That's
Yeah.
good. Yeah, send me a link to that, and I'll put it in the notes.
Okay.
That'd be great.
Yep.
Awesome. So if someone wants to learn more about what you do and who you are, how should they get in touch?
Well, yeah, our website is altezasolutions.com, and Alteza is spelled with two Z's. That word is Italian for altitude, by the way. Altezasolutions.com on the web, and then you can find me on LinkedIn. Last name is spelled Caton, Steve Caton. I'm on LinkedIn and pretty active, so connect with me there too.
Awesome. Well, on behalf of our viewers, thank you for joining us, Steve.
Yeah,
And I'm sure it's going to be helpful to those people that watch this. So thank you.
I hope so.
And if today's interview added value to you, please subscribe to this channel for future interviews with experts in the world of business.